Oh, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to introduce you, Kimberly. So,
I was
she's
just
our
going to
guest
start
speaker.
talking.
We got a guest speaker from MEQ, so Kimberly.
Special guest speaker.
Oh, yeah. And inquiries about that.
Okay.
Well, she's in
So
shadow.
I'm Kim. I'm with the Water
Can you
Permits
turn
Division at DEQ. I'm the manager of the Municipal and the General Permit section. So I handle all of the, I think it's better with the lights.
Better with the
but I
lights
can't
out.
see you now.
But I can't see you at
And
all.
leave the switch close to turn
You're
on.
in total
Yeah, the
shadow.
other switch.
Okay.
That
Can it turn down?
one. Okay, you can turn it, keep on going, you gotta hold it. You just gotta hold it.
Yeah.
It's sure not cooperating with you. There you go.
Yeah, okay. There, now I can see you and the screen.
As an engineer, he's having trouble with the light switch.
Okay, so I manage the Municipal and General Permit section, which is, it covers POTWs, everything from the majors, you know, 1 million gallons per day, and over to the very smaller subdivision package plants. General permits cover stormwater, like commercial facilities, car washes, pretty much anything of that nature. Some small oil and gas facilities too. So there's a lot that falls under my section, even though it's primarily general permits. And just to reiterate with the mission statement that LGQ is, it's to provide service to Louisiana, the citizens of Louisiana, to provide comprehensive environmental protection, to promote public health, safety, and welfare, but also considering sound policies regarding employment and economic development. So it is a balance for our agency. That is our actual mission statement. So as much as, you know, we would like to say no sometimes, I just don't want to issue you this permit. That's, you know, not in line with what our department's vision is. So Chuck initially gave me a very wide list of things to talk about, but we narrowed it down a little bit. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of water quality, trying to focus a little bit more on Ascension Parish. And I'm going to give an overview of the sanitary wastewater treatment permits and the process for obtaining a permit. And then talk a little bit about TMDL's area-wide policies and other management strategies that determine the limits that go into those permits. So first and foremost, our permitting program is the LPDES permitting program, which is, we're delegated by the EPA to implement the NPDES permitting program, which is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. So we are required to not only follow Louisiana rules and regulations, but also follow federal rules and regulations as well. And the permitting program is essentially permits any point source, and that's the shortened definition of a point source, and any discharge from a point source into waters of the state. And this is where we deviate a little bit from EPA and a lot of other states, is that our state-specific waters of the state definition includes literally everything from ditches to ponds, public or private, all lakes, swales. If it's some form of waterway or old surface water, is classified as the water of the state. A lot of other states do not go into this deep level of detail or inclusiveness in their water of the state definition. So we pretty much permit everything. We have a permitting universe of around 13,000 facilities just because of our waters of the state definition. The only exclusions are treatment ponds. So oxidation ponds, cooling lakes for power plants, those are really the only exclusions that are not considered a water of the state. And we issue LPDES permits primarily to prevent deterioration of the quality of our water bodies and also to prevent public health concerns associated with poorly treated wastewater. And this is the expectation, And these are actually some of the nicer water bodies in our state. That's Bocafalea River in St. Tammany, that's Lake Verret. I'm not sure where the Mayfly pictures were taken. I'll have to ask Alicia if she took that picture. But the expectation of the Clean Water Act is for all surface waters to be fishable or swimmable. And that's translated into our regulations as designated uses. So our primary designated uses are fish and wildlife propagation, secondary contact recreation, and primary contact recreation. And we have criteria that are assigned to each designated use. And we collect data and assess that data and determine whether or not those designated uses are being supported. Unfortunately, the reality is that the large majority of our waterways in Louisiana are impaired. A lot of them are impaired due to low dissolved oxygen, which results in algal blooms. A lot of it is the result of lack of compliance, with permitting, particularly wastewater treatment permits, and this is the ultimate result. This is from our most recent integrated report, which is a report that's published every 2 years, and it tells the public and other agencies, the designated use for whether, water body is supporting its fish and wildlife propagation use, its primary contact recreation use, or secondary contact recreation use. And 56% of our flowing rivers and streams do not support fish and wildlife propagation. And I'm sorry, 56% do not support primary contact recreation, and 73% do not support fish and wildlife propagation. The large percentage of fish and wildlife propagation is due to there's a large number of parameters that support that use. So it's not just dissolved oxygen, it's mercury, it's all sorts of toxics, and pH is another one, metals. So any of those parameters that are not meeting criteria in a water body, it gets listed under this designated use as being impaired. Now, the bottom two slides are our lakes. So the great majority of our lakes are meeting secondary contact recreation use, and but 80% are not meeting fish and wildlife propagation use. And secondary contact recreation use is because the only parameter that's associated with that use is fecal coliform. So there's only one parameter. When you're comparing a lake or one designated use to one parameter, fish and wildlife propagation to 50 parameters, there's a huge difference between the percentage of support and not support for those two designated uses. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but this is just a comparison of the primary causes of impairment for the fish and wildlife propagation use. And you can see it's pretty consistent from year to year. There are 235 to 234 subsegments that are impaired as a result of low dissolved oxygen. On this list, it's 111 impaired for enterococcus, which is another bacterial indicator for marine and estuarine waters. It does not apply to inland freshwaters. Fecal coliform applies to inland freshwaters, and there are 170 subsegments that are impaired for that, and 111 that are impaired for high mercury levels in fish tissue.
How many subsegments are there?
476, I think, somewhere around there. Every time there's a triennial revision of the water quality standards, it may go up or down, depending on lines being delineated, but there's about 476.
So could you back up one slide so we can see what percentage of that? So just a raw number.
Yeah, this is just a raw number.
So that's out
this
of
is
400 and some odd
Yeah.
total. Okay.
And this is not number of subsegments that are impaired total. This is just like the number that are impaired specifically because of
Well,
low
that's
dissolved
specific.
oxygen. Yeah, the number that are impaired specifically due to high enterococcus levels, et cetera.
So that's like half.
Yeah. And this is the number of subsegments, and this slide was broken down by river, lake, estuary, and wetland. These are the suspected sources of those impairments. So you can see agriculture is very high, municipal point source discharges are very high, but the highest is, oops, I thought I had a pointer, this is a pointer, is these decentralized systems, septic systems, and permitted small flow dischargers. And this is kind of a grouping of, maybe small subdivision package plants and also on-site sewage treatment systems from individual homes. And it's, this is wetlands.
Say something there?
Mm-hmm.
Those are suspected sources based on input from people in the field. So it may not be, 100% correct. It leaves out some things like hydrologic conditions and alterations of the water body.
Yeah. Okay, and so I zoomed in. We have this nice interactive tool now on our website, so you can zoom in and see the areas that are impaired. And this is approximately the Ascension Parish area, 38 subsegments. And this is the impairments for fish and wildlife propagation. And pretty much everything is impaired in this area, everything for fish and wildlife propagation. Now for primary contact recreation, there are much fewer impairments. So the orange is the impaired and the blue lines are not impaired. So a lot fewer impairments for high bacteria levels. And one of the primary reasons for a high number of impairments in this area is that there is really no centralized wastewater treatment except in the city of Gonzales. This excludes commercial industrial facilities, construction sites. These are just permitted dischargers of sanitary wastewater in this area. And yeah, there's a lot of,
Or no permitted.
yes,
Yeah, at least
that are actually permitted.
at least 360.
Yeah. So that leads us into the permitting part of the presentation. So there are two types of permits that we issue, general permits and individual permits. General permits, they're authorized, under the Code of Federal Regulations and our own regulations. I'm not going to read the exact citation to you. You can look it up if you want to read it. But it allows for us to issue a master general permit, which is a general permit that covers a class of facilities that would otherwise have identical limits and conditions in their permit. So it's a streamlined process. These facilities that qualify for coverage under these general permits, what they have to do is they have to submit a notice of intent. It's basically a different word for application. And that notice of intent does not have to undergo public notice because the master general permit undergoes public notice and EPA review every time it's reissued, every 5 years. And for sanitary wastewater, we have 4 classes of general permits. Class 1, less than 5,000 gallons per day. This is, a lot of your strip malls, hair salons, what else, Melissa? Office buildings, little dental offices, and pretty much, all your small businesses in Ascension Parish. And then we have your class 2, 3, and 4, and most of what falls under the class 2, 3, and 4 are maybe very large office complexes, smaller subdivisions to larger subdivisions. But to get a general permit, you have to be discharging or designed to discharge less than 100,000 gallons per day. Anything greater than that requires an individual permit. So the process for obtaining coverage under a general permit, even though it's a streamlined process, it's not come in with your NOI, get a stamp and get a permit. It does go through a series of review and evaluation. Upon receipt, before it ever comes to my group, Melissa's group, it goes through a review with the permit applications and administrative review section, the PAR unit, and they basically log everything in, they scan it, create the records, and then they look at it and just basically ensure that it's filled out. And yeah, we do get a lot where people don't even sign the NOI, or, you know, one whole sheet is blank, and they work to obtain the completed information before sending it over to water permits. Once it is complete, they'll issue the applicant an administrative completeness letter, usually via email, and then they'll pass it to us. They also notify the State Historic Preservation Office of any new projects. We have an agreement with the State Historic Preservation Office that they have 30 days to review any new or proposed discharges that may affect historic properties. So they get that notification as well. And then once we get it, Melissa is in charge of the general permit section. She assigns it to a permit writer, and the permit writer does a technical review of the application, which is a little bit more than just making sure everything is filled out. Is the applicant even eligible for coverage under the permit? Because a lot of times people just apply for the wrong permit. That permit writer requests additional information if needed, and then they look into the receiving water body. They generate a map. They research the impairments, TMDLs, water quality management plan, and area-wide policies. And then under that general permit, assuming the facility qualifies, they'll assign a schedule. For example, the Class 1 Sanitary General Permit has schedules A, B, C, all the way to M now. And they all have different limits and different parameters. So when you get your letter of coverage under a general permit, it's going to tell you which schedules under that general permit apply to that particular facility. And they also have to write a justification called a statement of basis that explains, why we can issue this permit, why we selected the limits that we did, the schedules that we did. It discusses the TMDLs and water quality impairments, etc. And then we notify the permit applicant that they have received coverage via letter, and we call it an Appendix A, which tells them which schedules and which conditions of the general permit apply to their facility. And this entire process takes about 60 days or more. 60 days is a good time frame, depending on how many NOIs we're getting on any one day. So even though it's streamlined, it's not an overnight process. Now for the individual permits, anything discharging 100,000 gallons per day or greater, or if it's a publicly owned treatment work, it's based on the design capacity. So say, an Ascension Parish facility, it's a POTW. It may only be discharging 40,000 gallons per day, but it's designed to discharge 120,000 gallons per day. They still have to have an individual permit, just because it's based on the design capacity. And this process, I forgot to mention, we can also require individual permits for smaller facilities that have a poor compliance history as well, because that bumps them up on the inspection list. They get inspected more frequently, and if they have poor compliance, we want the public to be able to review that permit and participate in the issuance of that.
Is that based on like an existing facility that's,
Yes.
or could it be based upon an operator or somebody?
Yeah. For
Has
example,
multiple facilities and there are other facilities you have problems with?
yeah. The best example I can give you, and this company was recently, or not recently, a few years ago, was bought out, but the company Modad, that had a whole bunch of subdivision treatment plants. They were all terribly run. They were all out of compliance. A whole bunch of them were under enforcement compliance orders, and most of them had individual permits, even though they were smaller facilities, just for that reason. Okay. Fortunately, Magnolia bought them out, and they're actually doing a lot better now. They've rehabbed a lot of those facilities. So with the individual permitting process, it requires that we draft the permit, and then that draft permit is public notice. And there's also an opportunity for a public hearing if one is requested. And the two types of individual permits, we have majors and minors. A major is anything, at least in the sanitary treatment world, is anything 1 million gallons per day or greater. And major permits are also subject to EPA Region 6 review prior to being public notice. So we draft the permit. Before we do anything else with it, it goes to EPA. If they have comments, we have to address their comments. And once everything's resolved with EPA, then it will go to public notice. And we also have the ability to designate certain minor facilities as discretionary majors. And we don't do this very often with sanitary treatment plants, but it is very often done with industrial facilities. So the application process for an individual permit, the owner or operator has to submit the individual permit application form, which is Form WPS-S. And even if it's an existing facility, they have to do that every 5 years. Their permits are only good for 5 years. 180 days before their permit expires, they're required to submit a renewal permit application. And upon receipt, it goes through essentially the same process that the general permit NOI goes through. It goes through administrative review, are all the boxes checked, etc. Is it a new discharger? Do we need to notify SHPO, etc. Once all that is completed, this process is also very similar to a general permit NOI, with the exception that the permit writer has to request stream flow data, because individual permits are screened to determine whether or not they need water quality based limits, which could be, and this is primarily for toxics like ammonia, maybe TDS and sulfates and chlorides, and then all of the metals and the priority pollutants. That's what a facility would receive water quality based limits on. And so this is a difference in the step between a general permit and an individual permit. But other than that, the permit writer does the same thing, researches the impairments, TMDLs, etc. And then they run a screen using that stream flow data and other data in the application to determine if water quality based limits are required. For minor permits, it's typically ammonia and chlorine. Those are the water quality based limits we see. For major permits, it can be ammonia, chlorine, metals, or any priority pollutant. And that would be things like benzene, cyanide, any metal. Surprisingly, we see a lot of cyanide pop up as needing limits in major POTWs. I think as part of the treatment process, somehow there's a reaction that generates cyanide, and they need to get that under control. Not that people are actually flushing cyanide down their toilets, but so in continuation with the application process, the permit writer completes the draft permit package, and that includes the draft permit with appropriate limits, monitoring frequency, and other conditions. And other conditions can include things like sewage sludge management. If it's a publicly owned facility, they have to have what we call an MWPP, which is a Municipal Wastewater Pollution Prevention Plan. And if there are any other unique aspects of the facility that need to be controlled, then we'll put additional conditions in that section. They have to do a statement of basis if it's a minor permit, a fact sheet if it's a major permit, and it includes all of the water quality screens, data summaries. If it's a major facility, they may have pre-treatment and biomonitoring requirements, and those recommendations will be included. And the annual fees are based on a point system, so it'll also include the fee rating sheet. The draft permit package is reviewed by the supervisor and the manager, and then the permittee is allowed a 10-day technical review. Primarily, this review is for the permittee to look and see if maybe something has changed or something in the application was not correct, and that resulted in something in the permit that was incorrect, or responsible officials have changed, phone numbers have changed, etc. And after that, then minor permits are public notice for a minimum of 30 days on our website. Major permits are reviewed by EPA. They have 30 days to review them, and then we public notice them for 30 days. And then, if requested and granted by our assistant secretary, we will hold a public hearing. Public comments are addressed, and then a final permit decision is made, and a final permit is signed by our assistant secretary. I can sign draft permits, but I cannot sign the final permit. That authority lies only with our appointed authority, which is the assistant secretary. And this entire process takes a minimum of 6 months, sometimes up to a year. Yeah, Diane.
During this process, haven't y'all started to incorporate communication with LDH?
It depends. There's of course they are copied on all of our draft permits. We copy the district manager, I think, on all draft permits, but particularly with general permits, if we receive, say, an NOI that we know this is going to be an issue because they want to discharge an invited mansion, which has no assimilative capacity whatsoever. And so at that point, we'll, call, our friendly LDH engineer and ask them, did you receive an application for this? Just so you know, do not approve them for a 30 milligram per liter CVOD limit because they're going to get a 5. We ran into that, early on when these TMDLs first were issued. That we would get a permit application or an NOI, and that we would issue a permit with a 5 milligram per liter VOD limit. And the permit applicant would call us crying because LDH gave them a permit for a plant that needs a 30 limit. No, I'm sorry. We determine the limits, not LDH, based on water quality. But
And that needs to be
yeah.
clearly defined.
Yeah, but we have much better communication with the LDH engineers.
We just participated in their sanitary training class that they had.
That for their sanitary meeting?
Yes, so all their newest sanitarians were there, and we had a booth, and we were discussing requirements, and that's one of the topics that we did concentrate on.
One of the tricks that I've seen in the field is that LDH will issue a sprinkler system or no discharge system, but they'll switch it in the field. And so that's not verified. So it becomes an outfall point after the fact, when it's supposed to be on paper with LDH as a on-site discharge. But then they kind of do a switcheroo, because they know no one's gonna come back later and figure that out. So I've gone out and I've seen an outfall pipe come out from what was supposed to be documented as an on-site discharge.
Yeah, we have had those.
I have a question, the second line, you have monitoring frequency. Who's responsible for either doing the monitoring or making sure that the monitoring?
It is self-monitoring and self-reporting, but the permittee does have to use a state-accredited laboratory. So LDEQ does have an accreditation process that goes out and evaluates labs, makes sure they're following the proper protocols, and gives them an accreditation. So they can't send their samples to be evaluated to a lab that's not accredited to run that analysis and give them a result. And then they have to report those results on a discharge monitoring report. report that's submitted to our agency. It's all electronic now, but whenever an inspector goes out into the field, they're gonna double check that. They're gonna, check, they're required, even if they don't submit the actual lab records to us, they are required to keep them. And when an inspector goes out, they verify that the lab is accredited, that, they're reporting the results of the lab, put on their lab reports, and that, their equipment is calibrated appropriately. A lot of facilities do their own pH measurements, and so they make sure that that equipment is properly calibrated.
Well, no, I'm
And-
just thinking too, making sure that they're actually, the
And so
samples
if
they're
there's
sending
a-
to the lab are actually from
Yeah.
their discharge.
We kind
Yeah,
of know.
we're working on doing split.
And so if there's a citizen has a complaint, they put it into spot, that by requirement, that has to be like, I think inspected within 72 hours or something like that.
Yeah.
And so if out of that, they may lead to some compliance sampling, in which we go out and sample the effluent and split it with them, and that's something that would be a check against the DMR.
But that's only commercial, because if it's a private citizen, you'll get the response saying it's not regulated.
That's would be for a home, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
only
we don't
individual
permit
homes. Yeah, and I didn't clarify that at the beginning of my presentation. We do not permit individual home sewage treatment systems.
And the DMRs there's a criminal liability.
But that's my question is,
Yeah.
if you got exceedances and they DMRs electronically, what's the indicator? Is somebody physically looking at that, or is it?
Yeah, we
You got a
have a law
database
enforcement section
that pinpoints, hey, you done had multiple exceedances for you, if you're doing it quarterly or semi-annual or annually, Because that's what I catch. I catch a lot of DMRs where they've got a lot of exceedances,
Yeah.
and there's really, the lag is from the surveillance to the enforcement side, and trying to bridge that a little bit.
Yeah, and in our defense, there are 20-some permit writers, but there's 5 enforcement staff.
Yeah,
So,
So that
there is a big
tells you
disparity.
how important enforcement is, right?
Yeah, but it is better now because everything's electronic. So when they submit DMRs and they're exceeding their limits in their permits, it's flagged now automatically. And they get an email saying, hey, you're exceeding your limits. You better take care of this because it's under review now. But it still does take a long time, if they're a persistent violator, for enforcement to actually take action and issue a notice of violation and potential penalty or expedited penalty, depending on what category they fall into. So that part does take a while. But just flagging it for exceedances, that's much more streamlined now than it used to be in just the past few years. Okay, so moving on, I'm almost done, and then Melissa can talk to you about stormwater. I'm not going to talk much about the toxic limits that go into permits. That's just a huge conversation for another day. But the conventional limits that are primarily associated with the impairment of low dissolved oxygen, BOD, CBOD, BOD is biological oxygen demand, CBOD is carbonaceous biological oxygen demand. So CBOD is BOD with the ammonia component removed. So whenever a facility has an ammonia limit, they get CBOD. If they do not have an ammonia limit, they get BOD. And a lot of facilities also have a minimum dissolved oxygen limit, meaning they have to re-aerate their effluent, and so on. And these limits are based on one of many plans. One is the statewide sanitary effluent limitation policy. This is basically our minimum requirements. Then we have some area-wide policies that are more specific, either subsegment or region or parish. And we have TMDLs. And then we have some internal LDEQ policies that we follow as well. And these internal policies are usually memorialized in, memos from the department head to our staff. And these are just some screenshots. Pretty much all of these policies, except for the internal memos, are memorialized in Volume 8 of the Water Quality Management Plan. And this is approved by EPA. It's incorporated into our regulations by reference. So this is a legal document. We can't just tell people, oh, so sorry, we're not going to give you a 5 limit. That's just being mean. We're going to let you have a 30. No. If it's not in compliance with this document, then they're not going to get anything else. So the statewide sanitary effluent limitations policy is right here. Less than 25,000 gallons per day. The minimum BOD limit is, or the maximum BOD limit, I'm sorry, is 30. Greater than 25,000 is 20. Greater than 50,000 is 10. And then the TMDL, specifically the Bayou Manchac TMDL, the limits get even more stringent than that. The limits are typically 5. And that's if you can meet one of the other conditions, which is having an on-site retention or detention pond, or taking in other unsewered areas to reduce the overall pollutant load. Because according to this TMDL, you cannot increase the pollutant loading into Bayou Manchac at all. Every new permit has to, in some way, result in either a net zero or negative pollutant load to Bayou Manchac.
When did this go into effect? 2011. This went into effect in 2011.
2011?
Yeah, well, yeah, 2011, it was approved by EPA. And then we have area-wide policies, and we do have some area-wide policies that were in place for Ascension Parish, East Baton Rouge, and Iberville. But most of these, like these were an area-wide policy for 0402. Bayou Manchac is in 040201. These limits are more stringent than the area-wide policies. So the TM, in this case, the TMDL trumps the area-wide policy. We go with the most stringent. And just in case anyone wasn't aware of what a TMDL is, it's a total maximum daily load of a pollutant. So that is the point source load plus a calculated non-point source load plus a margin of safety. And the TMDL document typically lists all model dischargers and their applicable limits, and each discharger is assigned what we call a waste load allocation, which usually translates to their permit limit. And here, this is something Chuck specifically asked me to talk about, which is the New River permitting policy. Now, New River is significantly impaired, almost as bad as Bayou Manchac, but we have not had a TMDL developed and approved for New River. But if one were to be developed, it would be similarly restricted as the Bayou Manchac TMDL. So as part of this whole new vision process, alternatives to TMDLs, we developed a new permitting policy specifically for New River. So new or expanded facilities that are discharging less than 5,000 gallons per day will receive limits of 10 milligrams per liter as a monthly average and 15 milligrams per liter CBOD. And they will also receive ammonia limitations of 2 and 4, monthly average and daily max. New or expanded facilities discharging 5,000 gallons per day or greater will essentially get the Bayou Manchac limits, which are 5 milligrams per liter monthly average, 10 daily max, and then also the 2 and 4 limits for ammonia, and they will also get the dissolved oxygen minimum. So that dissolved oxygen limit is a 5, but the dissolved oxygen in the effluent limit is not allowed to go below 5. It has to be 5 or above. So it's a little bit different than like CBOD, where it's not allowed to go above a 5 or a 10.
So that New River we actually surveyed, and we just somehow escaped the need to do a TMDL. It has been on every impaired list since at least 2000.
Yeah.
And this whole permitting policy was fashioned after the implementation plan that was put into the Bayou Manchac TMDL and basically all of Lake Pontchartrain Basin PMDLs.
Yeah.
The same sort of format was done for all of the TMDLs, but Bayou Manchac was the worst.
But none of this applies to individual treatment plants, so is that correct? I mean, how-
Individual homes.
It-
So if there is, say, an old house that was converted into a business, say like an antique shop or something, that antique shop would be required to have a permit. But if it's just somebody's home that they're living in, they own it, we don't permit that. That's just not in the umbrella of DEQ, LDH, the parish sanitarian's office permits individual homes. That's just the way the legislature.
And that's the way it ought to stay.
Yeah.
They ought to just stick with the
Yeah,
individual homes, anything commercial,
yeah.
DEQ,
Yeah.
etc.
Mhm.
But I guess my question is, if you know, check previous amount of how many.
Yeah.
Well, within
That's
the
just-
gun-
In this
Gonzales.
parish, everything is.
Well, that's what we have in a conflict, because you got an MS4 for Gonzales, the city. Then you got the MS4 for the parish, and New River. So, you know, so I'm talking with Jackie over there, and she's saying, no, we don't have a problem in Gonzales. I said, well, I beg the difference. You know, some of the higher limits are within, you
Yeah.
know, and then now we're getting to the point of what is actually city limits.
Yeah.
Because they take forever trying to change the, because they expanded for this, they changed it, so, you know, I'm trying to get the most current city limits
Yeah.
of Gonzales.
But to me, I mean, if you've already got an impaired water body, you shouldn't even be allowing an individual, or else
So
require.
an individual home should not be allowed to discharge?
Pardon me?
So you're saying so an
Uh,
individual home should not be
well-
allowed to discharge?
Well, I'm saying like if you have new, obviously you've got grandfathered in, but if you're having new stuff, if their only thing they can do is an individual permit, which is usually an individual treatment, which is not often the case anymore. I have one because I'm acreage, off, you
Yeah.
know, quarter mile off the road, but, you know, there'd be no way I could hook up. If there was a sewer system
Yeah.
on my street, I still couldn't hook up to it.
Yeah.
But
If-
for most people now, with most of Ascension, they're close
You
to,
did-
they should be able to tie into a sewer system. And like you're talking about, this new subdivision that they're doing where people want to discharge into New River, you know, I don't know if that's in the city or not, but just say it's not in the city. Why should we be allowing them to pump it right into New River, which is already impaired?
Well, you're talking about.
Or who's overseeing?
First of all, it's kind of a, you know, contentious area because
Yeah, fair.
you want to tell a homeowner they can't flush their toilets?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that's the contentiousness. But you're talking about.
Well, I'm talking about a new home, it's part of your permit. I'm just saying, it's part of your permit
Hold up,
to
I'm
build
not
a
sure.
home somewhere.
Development and planning is where you're talking about.
Right, right, exactly, and that's what I'm wondering, is that something that? we-
And then with the planning and zoning, all they look for is that no objection letter from LDH.
Yeah.
So once they get to no
And
falls
objections,
through the
they
cracks.
push the permits through.
Yeah, this is where we get back, and if we're talking about a commercial development or a subdivision treatment system, this is where we get back into LDEQ's mission of balancing environmental protection with economic growth and development. So very rarely are we given the okay to deny a permit. Usually when we do deny it, it's because they don't comply with the TMDL. And, but in the case of New River, there's nothing, yes, it's impaired, but there's not anything in our current rules or regulations that actually say you may not permit new dischargers to New River. What it does say is that we have to assign appropriate limitations and conditions in the permit. And that's why we developed that policy of extremely restrictive limits.
Something else I will announce is that we are scheduled, our contractor is going to be moving in to the New River watershed in October of this year to start the inspections of the individual home units.
Yeah.
That's the plan.
And like I said, hopefully you'll have some funding sources available where, you know, Grandpa Jones is 90 years old. who's lived in that house since 1910, you know, who has that, and you come in and try to say, hey, you know, you're gonna have to, on that fixed income, you got to upgrade your system.
From what I've heard, 80% of the cases are not that.
Yeah.
They're very simple stuff.
Well, I just worry about that.
But we are
Have like a
working on,
hardship
we have
or
been
something.
working on funding sources for that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, that is something that should.
but no, we'll have a parish-wide sewer.
yeah.
They have funding sources in place for that. Sanitary Parish has one in place now. I think it's through USDA, if I'm not mistaken, is that right?
Yeah, St. Tammany Parish has been very active, it's been a very active seeker of federal grants to fund their programs. And that's really what it takes, you know, you're not.
Somebody be aggressive and know how to write the grant.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
they
they
have, get people in compliance.
A grant writer is very important.
They have a grant writer.
So you can
That's
have an
it.
individual.
You gotta know how to write the grant, and once you know how, you know.
Yeah.
If the individual treatment plant's working properly,
We
then
have
it's not an
also
issue.
been talking with the parish, and we need to get back with them, because we have a pilot project out there to use SRF funding for that. And so that's something that's hopefully in the works, and if it goes well, that will go around to other parishes too.
Mhm. Yeah, I hope so. But yeah, that leads up pretty much to my final slide is the path forward to water quality improvement. The first one is really improved compliance. You know, enforcement, I can't, you know, say they're, you know, they don't catch everybody and they don't get everybody into compliance. It's an uphill battle for our enforcement group. It really is. But there are a lot of facilities, even municipal treatment plants, you know, that are publicly owned and operated that have very poor compliance histories. Improved compliance is the first step. Second step, particularly in an area like Ascension, is regionalization. I do know NWIS has plans to build a 5 million plant on the Mississippi River, which will take a lot out of Bayou Manchac, and that should be done in about 5 years. So that would help a lot once completed. And then the other things like these existing treatment plants can do, you know, just to improve their operation and maintenance, because this operation and maintenance ties directly to compliance. Pump out your sewage sludge. Even if you're a home owner, you need to pump out your sewage sludge every once in a while to maintain that system and keep it working properly. For subdivision treatment plants, aerators, post-aeration, they need chlorination and dechlorination, because chlorine is very toxic to aquatic life. So if you use chlorination to meet your fecal coliform limit, you also need to dechlorinate. We've been assigning limits, total residual chlorine limits to most individual permits for the past 5 or 6 years. So that's been an improvement. And just, you know, have good operators. You know, there are some people that, you know, some towns in the middle of the state, will say who, that, you know, hire their brother-in-laws to run the treatment system, and they don't know what they're doing. They're not properly certified. So that's an issue that enforcement has come across a lot. And in some cases, there's just no other option but to upgrade the treatment plant, you know, because otherwise it may not meet the limits any other way. So if you have, y'all ask questions along the way, all great questions. If you have any other questions, you can call this number and talk to any one of us. Melissa handles the general permits, so anything under 100,000 gallons per day, and Todd Franklin is the supervisor over the individuals. So all of the municipal treatment plants, larger subdivision plants, they go through his group, and I'm the manager of both sections. And that is it. Any more questions?
What's your reason, Stan? I know, remember one time we worked on a 500 gallon per day treatment plant on the Highland Road that converted from an outfall over to a spray irrigation or a French drain, but you wanted it to still maintain a permit. Of course, they've never tested it ever since we put it in. But they were
Was
going
that
to test it out.
Highlandia?
Yeah, Highlandia.
Yeah, we have gone back and forth with that. owner-operator, for a couple of years. I think we finally got it straightened out. I don't know.
But that was a converted system to spray because the plant was already
Yeah.
out. And so,
But we sent an inspector out there. They really don't discharge much, if at all, but yes, they have an outfall pipe. But we did get confirmation that they did have LDH effluent reduction
Right.
system. And that actually does comply with the
Reduction
Biofuels Act.
field, they call it.
but they're still supposed to report DMRs based on,
Yeah,
not
but
at
they're
the
not
reduction
doing that.
point, but at that,
and then the
the
plant, yeah.
outfall of the
Yeah.
plant, you know, but they haven't pulled any, you know,
No.
because they feel like they don't need to, you know,
Yeah.
and stuff. So are you saying on the effluent reduction, you're gonna require, DMRs, but not on sprinkler?
Yes. That's just because based on LDH's, the state sanitary code, the rules and parameters surrounding their treatment system design, a spray irrigation system is classified as a no discharge system, whereas effluent reduction is just that reduction. It doesn't.
And how it got classified as a zero discharge system?
You'd have to
That's
ask.
the question I've been asking. Nobody, you know, because I was told by Keenan that Glover, that there's the MOU between the two agencies. So then I requested to
We
see
don't
it,
have an
and there's no
MOU.
MOU, so it's like, okay, when was this decision made? Who made the decision?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the state sanitary code, that and there's like a couple other systems that I've never seen, like a mount system or an overland flow system. I've never seen anyone use one of those, but those are in the state sanitary code as a no discharge system. So
Provided they are installed,
provided they are installed correctly.
and then nobody's checking if they're
Yeah.
installed correctly.
So you said we don't have an MOU.
No, we don't have an MOU.
I remember, when
Keenan
was,
Glover.
we was like revamping the.
There was one that was proposed and drafted, but it was never signed by our respective appointees.
Appointees. Okay. You got a new one now, maybe or something.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
And that's gonna last, what, 8 months?
Yeah. All right. We get Melissa's presentation.
And
Talk
you're
about
gonna have,
stormwater.
you can better email that to us, Joe.
If they give it to me, yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
So Kim and Melissa, can we get copies of these?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll email them to Chuck and he
All right,
can send
appreciate
one
that.
out to whoever signed in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm Melissa Regal, and I'm in water permits as well. I'm supervisor over the general and municipal permits group. And Kim had gone over what our group does, what types of permits we do. It's all kinds of different industry sectors, concrete, sanitary, sand and gravel, stormwater. We do actually, our name is general permits, but we actually do issue some individual permits too. The individual permits that we issue are related to stormwater. And I'm going to talk about the municipal stormwater this time around and the Ascension Parish's MS4 program. Okay, so what is MS4? MS4 is a municipal separate storm sewer system, and it's a conveyance or a system of conveyances designed to collect stormwater, and that's like anything from like a grate, a street, it could be a storm drain, ditches, man-made channels, anything that conveys stormwater. And it's owned by the state, a city, or municipality. Am I getting?
Oh, yeah, you're fine. I'm just making sure we can, I'm just making sure we can read your thing. You're fine.
Okay. Sorry. It's owned by a city, a municipality, a state, it could be a town, it could be a university, it could be a federal facility as well. It's not a combined sewer. Louisiana does not have combined sewage. It's more of a northeastern area, that kind of thing. It's also not part of a publicly owned treatment works. Okay, so the purpose of the program is to minimize the discharge of pollutants from the regulated area of waters of the state. Implementing DPs results in less pollution and also ensures that future discharges do not cause or contribute to a violation of water quality standards. Okay, so there are different types of MS4s. Okay, so the first type is phase 2. Those are small MS4s, and that's anybody from a population size generally under 50,000. And it includes towns, maybe a small city. It could include like a parish or a military base, like Barksdale Air Force Base is one. DQ designated areas as well. And it's regulated by general permits, and that's LAR 04. And the second type are phase 1s, and that's going to be either a medium MS4 or a large MS4. And the large are over a population size over 250,000. So you can, when you get to large, you're talking about a parish. And it includes parishes, it includes cities. In Louisiana, they're designated by those regulations, and those are regulated by individual permits. And we are using the 2010 U.S. Census map right now. That's the link to it. And the 2021 hasn't come out yet, so whenever that comes out, we might expand the universe, or it might actually detract some of the universe, actually.
Yeah, it has.
Depending if cities have grown, or maybe they've shrunk some, or parishes. That's something we'll have to evaluate. Also, another note of caution, the 2020 census is moving away from using the urbanized area definition. They're going to be defining it a different way. So that's going to change how we look at designating as well. Okay, so like I said, there's different kinds of MS4s. There's your traditional ones, like the ones that have run by a parish or a town or a city. But also there's a non-traditional MS4s, like the military bases, airports. The Lafayette Airport is one of them. The universities, like LSU's one, has a program. Southern has a program. And let's see, there's other universities. I think the Lafayette University as well.
Yeah.
There's some co-permittees too. Some of the small MS4s have co-permittees, like Iberia Parish has several of them. Calcasieu Parish Police Jury is co-permittee with several of them. So they all share responsibilities, and they have interagency agreements. All the phase 1 individual permits, they all have co-permittees because they're so large. Okay, and these are the list of small MS4s. So I'm going to switch to talk to just about the small MS4s because that's the type of one that Sanitary Parish is. So as you can see, there's a lot of parishes that are permitted as small MS4s. Several cities, we've got some towns, and the non-traditional one, that's Barksdale and Fort Coleman. Okay, and the process for these are, there's an NOI that's submitted, DQ staff, we review the NOI, and if there's any kind of deficiencies that we know from their NOI, we'll send a notice of deficiency. And if all those are addressed, then we will send an administrative completeness email, letter, and in that it'll say the NOI is ready for public noticing. So this was a little different. We public noticed the NOI up front. And that has 30 days. We do that online now. So if you go online, anybody from the general public can look those up. And then we issue a notice of authorization if we have no comments or we've already addressed all the comments. Okay. And the part of the application process is to develop this, what's called the Stormwater Management Plan. And it's a living document that describes how the MS4 for reduce and discharge leaks. It's a living document because it's supposed to evolve over time. Like maybe you have different focus this year. There's some new TMDLs, like Kim was talking about. Or there's some new polluants of concern in your area. Maybe you have a new education initiative that you have. So as that grows and as your program grows, your stormwater management plan will do that too, and it'll expand. It addresses the FERC requirements, including the 6 minimum control measures, called MCMs. It includes best management practices and measurable goals. We identify the local pollutants, the TMDLs, waste allocations, and that's the key. It's developed for your city or your parish or whatever kind of program you have. So it's going to be different from each MS4. So whenever you choose reviewing them, we look at that specific program. So no two are going to be the same. Each one of them is going to have a local program that's tailored to their program. And maybe they have different priorities in those cities or parishes. Okay. It includes a schedule of future goals and milestones. And the buzzwords are, it must be clear, specific, and measurable. All your BMPs, best management practices, and all your measurable goals for those have to be clear, specific, and measurable. And that's actually defined in the regs at 2523A. Okay, so also the BMPs, you have to describe those best management practices, and once again, your measurable goals for each one, including the milestones and frequency of how you're going to be doing whatever that is, and persons responsible for each implementation of each best management practice. And once again, all your measurable goals and your best management practices have to be detailed, clear, specific, and measurable. And the 6 minimum control measures that are required by the permit. The first one is public education and outreach. The second one's public involvement and participation. Third, illicit discharge detection and elimination. 4, construction site stormwater runoff control. 5, post-construction stormwater management in new development and in redevelopment. And 6, pollution prevention or good housekeeping for municipal operations. Those that question I was asked. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about highlight two, and talk about the MCM permit requirements and how Sanitary Parish is actually regulating those. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the illicit discharge detection and elimination program. So the permit itself requires that the MS4 develop, implement, and enforce a program to eliminate illicit discharges in the MS4. And secondly, it requires an ordinance that includes enforcement procedures and actions to prevent the non-stormwater discharges. So like non-stormwater discharges would be something like maybe like a car wash, or it could be something really bad, like an industrial wastewater thing. And what Sanitary Parish is doing to meet these permit requirements is the parish has a stormwater ordinance that was recently passed by the Parish Council in 2021, and provided additional enforcement provisions to address illicit discharges. And secondly, the parish Department of Public Works collects surveillance for illegal dump sites. Also, they maintain that, a list of those, and they investigate illegal dump sites. Also, the parish drainage department identifies suspects' connections to the sanitary sewer, and they maintain GIS data on to identify permitted and non-permitted connections. So that's all good. Secondly, the other one I want to talk about was the construction site stormwater runoff control program. The permit requires to develop, implement, and enforce a program to reduce pollutants from construction activities. So one of the things that Sanitary Parish does that's really interesting is they have these pre-construction meetings for any kind of development, and commercial, industrial, whatever, residential too, actually. And the Parish Office of Planning and Development requires each contractor and developer to submit construction and stormwater pollution prevention plans prior to having that pre-planning meeting. So you get on the front end and tell them all the requirements, and that's something that's really good. I haven't seen that in other programs. Other programs, they review the plans, but I haven't seen where they have a pre-construction meeting. So
Yeah, the issue is actually getting them to implement what they put in the plan.
yeah. And let's see, you said that was for residential and commercial projects. Yeah, so yeah, and reading often.
Yeah, we have, every project, whether it's commercial or residential, we come in this room, that's why you see the table put away.
Yeah.
And we do a pre-con, they got the engineers, they got, anybody from the road crew, anybody from, they all meet.
That's good, yeah.
We spell out exactly what we expect.
Oh, okay, that's
And
great.
we just recently got a new ordinance passed with the perimeter drainage requirements too, to stop flooding your neighbors.
And also having sediment going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't,
That's really great, yeah.
that
We're trying to get a
was
little
money
more
water
aggressive.
flowing through
We
everybody.
recently been getting a little more aggressive. But,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good thing.
and we're gonna be proactive too, because we wanna get to the point where New River, and we're gonna try to, that's my question is, has anybody ever progressed to try to clean up any of these water bodies? My mindset is if I can eliminate new, then then I can work on what's occurring. So that's kind of my mindset.
I mean, for cleanup, you mean just like general cleanup? of-
Does anybody's ever improved the water quality of a water that's been on a 303D list? Or,
Collier Creek. I think so.
Yeah, West Collier Creek was recently removed
Yeah, that was, I
from,
saw where that.
Which one?
West Collier Creek in Livingston Parish.
kudos to LP.
Yeah, Livingston Parish has made great strides with regionalization.
But doesn't the 319 program help fund some of those? I
Um,
know I worked on a project with,
I'm not
in
sure
Chancellor
about
Road with the land trust.
We
on one
removed
state.
8 water bodies from the impaired water body list, including the largest water body ever removed from an impaired water body list.
Which one?
Amy?
630 square mile Lake Pontchartrain.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The people of southeast Louisiana, we got a lot to be proud of.
Yeah.
Which parish was that, or the city?
What's that?
What city?
Well, Lake Pontchartrain kind of borders,
Yeah.
16 parishes.
yeah.
We
Yeah.
all drain into Lake Pontchartrain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which they're all screaming about the
Yeah, but it all starts as, grassroots efforts.
Of course, Lake Pontchartrain was cleaned up by them not dredging for shells anymore.
Yeah, that was a big
That was a
factor.
big reason that got.
Yeah.
And now that's why everybody's fighting it being used, like Marlpole being used for carbon capture, because they don't want to see
Yeah, the
the
dredge.
lake destroyed.
Yeah.
I think St. Tammany.
Because they're gonna have to dredge to do anything there, and that's gonna stir everything up. It's too shallow.
But no other county in the nation can say that they've done as much as we have here in southeast Louisiana.
Yeah.
As far as removing water bodies from the impaired water body list. Because we removed not just the biggest, but probably the most also.
Well, it's also, I think, that's a very good point too, in that, because we're so rapidly growing, if we can not only keep it from getting worse, but actually make it better, that's my goal, is to make all the water bodies better.
Yeah.
And
And I actually go in.
because we're already in bad shape, so, just keeping it status quo is not a win.
Right.
It's like the highway in front of my street, it still takes me an hour to they'll go 1 mile on it, it's not an improvement. If they just change the cycle on the red light, it's not gonna fix it.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kim talked about total maximum daily load allocations, TMDLs, and remember she showed that slide where TMDL equals the point sources plus the non-point sources plus the margin of safety. Well, for point sources, sometimes that includes analysis of MS4s as well. So that means the MS4s can also get waste allocations, just like another kind of permit. And so if you do have TMDL, first you've got to document in the stormwater management plan how your BMPs and other controls selected by the MS4 will control and minimize the discharge of the pollutants of concern. So say it's a TMDL for dissolved oxygen, then you have to address how you're going to control dissolved oxygen in your community. And you must first check the Louisiana Water Quality Integrated Report and to check if there's any TMDLs developed for your area and within the MS4 jurisdiction. And sometimes there's going to be several TMDLs developed for that area because you're talking about a very large area.
I mean, you talk about Monument, that's multiple parishes.
Yes.
So-
Yeah. So you could have like 10 stub segments in your area. And if any TMDLs are developed, next you need to review if there's waste allocation developed. If so, what kind of waste allocation? Is it for the whole parish, or is it for just this one area of the parish, or is it just one city? Then you have to check if the MS4 discharges to that water, the waste allocation. And if so, then they have to develop a monitoring program and develop and implement a monitoring program. And then you have to report on the progress of your BMP's best management practices in your annual report.
Don't forget that new TMDLs will have future growth too.
Yes. Okay, so next, annual reports. Annual reports are required by the permit and by regulations too. And it's for, to include information demonstrating the permittee's effort for the preceding year. And it's a calendar year, so January through December. So
Yes,
March 10th, that was the next slide. And they're due March 10th. It's for that receipt here. Well, I asked for 2 copies of them, so you can have one to scan and then one sent to us for review. Also, you're always welcome to email us if you have additional information. We can work with that too, and read that ahead of time. Because sometimes there's a bit of a delay in getting for the records department as well. Okay, also, more on the Central Parish MS4. So they're regulated by an LPS permit, general permit. That's LA 1034. It was reissued on December 30th of 2019. What's interesting about Central Parish is it excludes the city of Gonzales because they have their own permit. It's always an option if the city within your parish wants to have their own permit, they can, or they can be a co-permittee. In this instance, they wanted to have their own permit. Okay, this is a map of Central Parish and all the water bodies. So, Kim was talking about my mansion. That's this one right here, and this is New River in the middle with let's see, you got Duplessis, Gonzales, and then also above that is the Amy River. That's up by Galvez. And
Blood.
Yeah, the Blind River. Or Blind River.
oh, Blind River, yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah, quite sorry.
Yeah, it's at the bottom of the
Yeah,
map.
that one. Okay, sorry. And the Central Parishes, TDLs and waste allocations for them, that subsegment that I was talking about with Bayou Mancheck, there is a TDL and a waste allocation for oxygen demanding pollutants. And for the Amy River on subsegment 040306, and it was formerly 040302, there's a TPL for fecal coliform as well. So remember, if you have a waste allocation, then the MS4 storm management plan must include clear specific individual goals and BMPs on how they're going to address and minimize that. So they have to minimize oxygen demanding pollutants and fecal coliform now. And there are also some impairments that do not have TMDLs developed for them, but they're attributed to MS4s. So there's a couple of those subsequents as well. The first one, that AB River one, 04306, has an impairment for turbidity. So this one, 04306, they have a turbidity impairment. So in addition to that, they have the Central Parish has to assess that as well. And
Small portion of Tennessee.
yeah, and then that New River one that Kim was talking about, 04404, there is also an impairment for dissolved oxygen that's attributed on-site treatment plants, which when you show the map of all the treatment plants that are permitted, that directly kind of leads into this, because there's also a lot of unpermitted, like the ones that are permitted by Department of Health, for like, they have individual units. And all that's going to be addressed by the MS4's illicit discharge detection and elimination program and medical goals. And I'm also going to talk to you about how Central Parish is addressing that too. Okay, so the parish is currently working towards reduction of the oxygen demanding pollutants in Bayou Mancheck, that was at a 4201 watershed, through regionalization of sewage treatment plant in the parish. And the parish intends to tie in as many of the businesses and residential neighborhoods, commercial businesses as possible. Yeah. Or
1,200, I'm trying to remember the number, to one.
And because they're very likely on these individual units, and some of them not maintained as accurate as they could be. So by connecting them to the parish with their advanced treatment, that's going to improve water quality. And in 2022, the parish made significant progress towards establishing a receiving stream sampling and analysis program that they developed with DQ, actually, with their water planning and assessment division. And additionally, the parish Department of Public Works conducts surveillance, and I'll talk about that with their illegal dump sites. And those are identified through citizen complaints and their stormwater inspections and mowing activities. And additionally, the parish established a waterway management crew to remove debris from navigable waters and drainage canals. That's been a problem everywhere, it seems like. But all that's going to improve upon water quality as well. And that turbidity impairment that we talked about, that's directly tied to the parish's review of the stormwater control effectiveness at construction sites. Because if you maintain construction site BMPs, then you're going to be reducing any kind of sediments beneath the
But
turbidity.
it seems like that's a hard one to test because, you know, the background activity is already bad.
Yeah.
So, and remember, we had that construction stormwater committee that was removed years back. So, I mean, I'm wondering how they're gonna show improvement in that.
There are ways to show improvement just by, say, lack of fewer enforcement actions,
Oh, so it's
against-
not-
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be tied directly to,
I
a
see.
water quality measurement
I
or
see.
an impairment. Like the parish just has to show, like, this is what we are doing and this is where we've seen improvement. Last year, we issued, 110 violations for improperly maintained, construction BMPs. And this year, we only issued 80, so that's an improvement over time.
Of course, that's assuming they're doing the same level of
Yeah.
actually looking for the violation. So,
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, you gotta look at that.
I have a question too, you have about, the removing debris and the turbidity. I mean, to remove debris, you're gonna be dredging and you're gonna create turbidity.
Well, no, we don't really dredge to get the debris out. It's basically trees that are falling, they come in with crews and we pull the trees down.
But I mean, some of that can actually improve water quality.
But the dredging project is
No,
actually
it's
going
like
on
a
in the
re-
river. And that's not really a parish, that's actually a city of Gonzales thing.
And it'd be the time of flooding as well.
Or especially if they're removing the vegetation on the banks that would be shading the water and keeping it cooler and aiding with the dissolved oxygen or improving, having the vegetation on the bank. That's what I don't understand when they come in and they clear all the vegetation off the banks and then complain because it's,
They really shouldn't be doing that.
but they do.
because
And the Corps does it, I mean, they're
Yeah.
doing that on all the waterways in Baton Rouge and they're
Yeah.
claiming that's an improvement. I've gone by and seen what they're doing on
Yeah.
Manchac, Wood Creek, and all of, you go look behind on Seagan.
Yeah.
They're cutting down all the trees down in and on the banks, which would have been, one,
Yeah.
collecting all the trash before it ever gets in the waterway, but also absorbing all the runoff pollutants and helping slow down the water flow.
Yeah.
But it's like,
I can't speak for core practices, but like our construction permit requires, any construction project operators, owners to maintain buffer zones. So just under our, or I don't know what the parish ordinance says, but just under our permit, they are not allowed to clear cut directly to the stream.
And if we are allowed to review those types of projects, we comment accordingly on
Yeah.
it.
I mean, that's what they did as, that project they're doing right now on all the, it's one that was actually approved like 20 years ago or
Yeah.
something, and they just finally got funds to do it, and they're using the old standards of,
Yeah.
when people didn't know any better, of, hey, cut all the trees. Because there was a big fight when they wanted to cut all the trees down on the banks of the Bayou Manchac years after Katrina. And all the residents were up in arms about it, since that's,
Yeah.
those trees aren't gonna fall in, and it's a scenic stream, and people wanna be able to canoe, like if we wanna make the river something that people can enjoy, they don't wanna canoe in a ditch.
Right.
They wanna canoe with wooded stream banks, and so somehow we need to have the right hand talking to the left hand and saying,
Yeah.
this is a desirable thing to have this vegetation on the banks. Woody vegetation ideally,
Yeah.
and then you don't have to mow it. And it keeps the water cool, and your dissolved oxygen would be better.
It keeps the channel stable,
Hmm?
and it keeps the channel stable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Not in this parish, but I know of another parish where they actually go down and spray the banks, and it is causing massive erosion.
They're doing that
In the banks.
here.
I mean, I got pictures of it where like 30-foot sections of the banks just slough off into the creek, which makes the creek wider and shallower, which leads to more flooding. They claim they're doing it to prevent flooding, and they're causing more flooding by
Exactly.
spraying the banks.
But FEMA wants them to keep that clear, and that's what they think it means to keep it clear. So it's
No,
like
that's not.
FEMA's got a rule, to, you know,
Yeah.
and it's like they're, because I was working on something in Tangipahoa that was that exact thing. It was trying to get them to leave. It was one of the impaired stream banks. It was a 319 permit with that the land trust was doing. And it was to look at conservation along certain waterways to help address the problems. And one of the big problems was going and talking to the parish, why, because they were spraying everything. And it's like, if you keep that vegetation on the banks, it wouldn't be as big a problem.
Yeah.
And just trying to,
And it bows down to the water.
yeah.
You know, it's just weeds and grass, and when the floods come, they just bow down. And, you know, a week later, they're back up again, you know?
We got about 3 minutes left, y'all.
Let's finish it. Yeah, I don't have too much on. The 2021 annual report for calendar year 2021 was just recently reviewed by DQ, and we didn't have any deficiencies. And that's the one that we wrote. It's not my And the 2022 one is under review right now. Ascension Parish, we already talked about a lot of these. One of the other highlights they had in their program was over 23,670 cubic feet of litter was collected as part of the parish programs. They had a trash bash, Christmas tree drop-off day, and a hazardous waste collection day. And they did, somebody was asking about stormwater inspections. They did 394 stormwater inspections during the 2022 calendar year. And we did already talk about that. And these are just some references for further review. The first one is EPA's website. They have really great webinars on there. We'll get several of them. They have some great training as well. They also, DQ, that's our permit, it's the next page. Also, we had a MS4 conference in 2019 at DQ at headquarters in Baton Rouge, and that's all of our presentations. So we love to download any of those for further review. And this is our stormwater team. The smallest waters are reviewed by Mountain, Richard, Goodrich, and Municipal. And the individual MS4 permits are reviewed and reports are reviewed by Alicia Walsh. And Kim's the manager of the group, and I'm supervisor. And they might have